Hi everybody. We're gonna wait a few minutes here to get some more people on here. If anybody's got any questions, now's the time. There'll also be time for questions later too. We're gonna go through the criminal complaints that I filed against the. Hi everybody. We're gonna wait a few minutes here to get some more people on here. If anybody's got any questions. So we're going to go through the, for starters, we'll go through the criminal complaints that I filed against the University of Texas Regents, Board of Regents, over the MD Anderson Cancer Center. Somebody yesterday commented that that they don't really treat cancer, that they're, and I agree. Okay, I would never, ever, ever go to such a place, and so you wouldn't catch me dead there. Well, you might catch me dead there if I was dead. Anyways, oh, Aunt Knox, good morning, New Jersey. Well, shoot, we're not too far from you. I don't know where you're at in New Jersey, but we're in Ocean City right now, and 2 blocks from the water. Anyways, so we're going to go through these criminal complaints that I filed with the against the how does one beat a criminal complaint with an alleged victim? I'm not sure exactly what you're saying there. Somebody's accused you of a crime. Anyways, we're going to go through these criminal complaints first of all, and that I filed with the MD Anderson Cancer Center that had that completely changed everything. Okay, what happened was, and I talked about it yesterday. A friend's wife was they were trying to make her take the jab. She was a nurse there for like 20 years, getting close to retirement, and they were trying to make her take a jab or she's going to get fired. And so I filed these criminal complaints. I didn't have any evidence attached. And we'll go through them. As far as beating a criminal complaint, I would say I would be wanting to see the victim. Okay, where's the victim? I need to face my accuser. And a lot of times nowadays, you know, it's complete denials of due process or all over the place. And even these criminal complaints, you know, I'm accusing someone of something, and I have evidence. The evidence is the email, but I don't attach the email. So they have to investigate it, you know, and that's all they can do. If someone accuses you of a crime, it'll be the same thing. You're entitled to face your accuser. Okay, that's common law, and they can't just stick to your guns on that. You know, when can I meet the accuser? When can I meet the claimant? Claimant, I would call him the claimant. Anyways, there's a friend of mine. This actually the friend of mine that his wife was a nurse there. He is a disbarred attorney. So he's really sharp, I'm telling you. Well, because I've been educating him, and so he's actually involved with a group that they do that they'll I mean they'll get credit card debts discharged and all sorts of stuff where they just stick to their guns and say, when can I meet the claimant, and be real nice and polite, and they'll make. One of the guys makes phone calls to the credit card companies, and they discharge the debt. And so anyways, That's not an area of my expertise, okay? You know, and so that's, I mean, within limits. I mean, that's not something that I'm real good at. I wouldn't, if I knew more about it, I might, you know, talk about it on my channel, but I try and talk to stuff that I know that I can do, that works. And if there's a lot of theories out there, unproven theories, and so that you know, or in my opinion, bogus. A lot of disinformation, and so I try and stick to stuff that I know that works, that I've done, and this is stuff that I've done. And so as far as these criminal complaints are concerned, there's actually 4 criminal complaints I filed against them, and well, this was Christine Melton Crane is on the University of Texas Board of Regents, okay, and all of this stuff information is freely available online. You just go online and do a little bit of research. She's a bar member and an officer of the court and deemed to know the law, and there was there was a chief counsel, and there was like 3 bar members on this Board of Regents. There's 5 people on the board, 5 or 6, and so the bar members are the low-hanging fruit, okay? And I can, if I really wanted to be vindictive, I could file bar grievances against these people, and bring even more heat down on them. But I think that what's happened is there's been a good, we've gotten good results out of it. I'm not sure that I'm going to pursue it beyond this. I've got too many irons in the fire to go and pick a fight where I got the results that I wanted to get anyways. Yeah, one of the comments is somebody's brother-in-law is a nurse at a kidney dialysis center. 4 nurses aged 48 to 62 have dropped dead in the last few months, you know, and they took the jab. And you know, that was the concern of my friend's wife, and so she didn't want to take the jab, and I don't blame her. I think she had already taken the jab, and they were trying to force her to take a booster, and she was just like resisting. She had not applied for an exemption, okay? They all have an opportunity to apply for an exemption. Everybody that applied for an exemption was turned down. Anyways, so we'll go through the criminal complaints. The first one, I filed 4 criminal complaints against all four people. 4 or 5. There was a chief counsel, and I think there was 3 or 4 people on the Board of Regents that were bar members. So the bar members were the low-hanging fruit. Anyways, in the name and by authority of the state of Texas, that's required under their codes, as a direct descendant of the founders of the Constitution of the United States of America, which is the supreme law of the land, and as one of the posterity found in the preamble, by right of blood, I hereby declare Christine Melton Crane is on the University of Texas Board of Regents and a bar member and an officer of the court and deemed to know the law. And here's a court case. Officers of the court have no immunity when violating a constitutional right, for they're deemed to know the law. Now, and that's Owens versus Independence. Now, that's a summary of that case, okay? And you have to, so you might not find that actual phrase in that case. It'll be a summary of that case. I use a lot of summaries, okay? But it makes a lot of sense too. And I have reason to believe and do believe that Christine Melton Crane is engaged in war crimes in violation of 18 U.S. Code, Section 2441, and then I have the sections out of the code, and I have underlined the part that is relevant. Okay, so we'll just read the underlined part. There's no reason to read the rest of it. Well, we can start off with reading at the top here. Whoever, whether inside or outside the United States, commits a war crime in any of the circumstances described in subsection B shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for life or any term of years or both, and if death results to the victim, shall also be subject to the penalty of death. And so the circumstances referred to in subsection A are that the person committing such war crime or the victim of such war crime is a member of the armed forces of the United States or a national of the United States. Okay, that's all that matters. Have to be a member or a national, a United States national. Okay, doesn't have to be a U.S. citizen. And so, and it goes through, it says, have to be prohibited, a grave breach of the International Convention signed in Geneva on 12th of August 1949 for any protocol to such convention to which the United States is a party, prohibited by Articles 23, 25, 27, 28, annexed to the Hague Convention 4, respecting the laws and customs of war. Okay, so anyways, and so then they go further and they define some of the stuff. Prohibited conduct. Torture, the act of a person commits or conspires to commit an act specifically intended to inflict severe physical or mental pain or suffering other than pain or suffering incidental to lawful sanctions upon another person within his custody or physical control for the purpose of obtaining information or a confession, punishment, intimidation. Okay, intimidation, coercion. Okay, those are relevant words in this case because she's being intimidated and coerced for any reason based upon discrimination of any kind. Paragraph B, cruel or inhuman treatment, the act of a person who commits or conspires or attempts to commit an act intended to inflict severe physical or mental pain, suffering other than pain or suffering incidental to lawful sanctions, including serious physical abuse upon another within his custody or control. So that could fall into it. Performing biological experiments. This one definitely does. The act of a person who subjects or conspires or attempts to subject one or more persons within his custody or physical control to biological experiments without a legitimate medical or dental purpose, and in so doing endangers the body or health of such person or persons. And mutilating or maiming, the act of a person who intentionally injures or conspires or attempts to injure or injures, whether intentionally or unintentionally, in the course of committing any other offense under this subsection, one or more persons taking no active part in hostilities, including those placed out of combat by sickness, wounds, detention, or other cause, by disfiguring the person or persons, by mutilation, or by permanently disabling any member, limb, or organ of his body without any legitimate medical or dental purpose. Now, and that could apply. Anyways, in support of their criminal street gang, this is under Texas Code of Criminal, or Texas Penal Code. This is actually a really good definition. I use this all the time. And so in this chapter, a combination means three or more persons who collaborate in carrying on criminal activities. Participants may not know each other's identity. Membership in the combination may change from time to time. Participants may stand wholesaler, retailer, or other arm's length relationship in illicit distribution operations. Conspires to commit, and then an agreement constituting conspires to commit may be inferred from the acts of the parties. I mean, you know, that's gold there, I'll tell you. Anyways, criminal street gang means three or more person with a common identifying sign or symbol and identified leadership who continuously regularly associate in the commission of criminal activities. Boy, that nails it too. Okay, because she is chief counsel for the University of Texas Board of Regents, and she authorized Dr. Peter Pisters to send an email requiring Diane blankety blank and other employees of the MD Anderson Cancer Center to participate in his biological medical experiments with an experimental injection that they're calling a vaccine, that they're required to know that any so-called COVID-19 vaccination is an unapproved medical experiment, and Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that Texas is under a military occupation and has been since 1862 when the Union Army invaded Galveston, Texas. And this is Article 1 of the Libre Code. A place, district, or country occupied by an enemy stands in consequence of the occupation under the martial law of the invading or occupying army, whether any proclamation declaring martial law or any public warning to the inhabitants has been issued or not. And that's the Libre Code was written by Francis Libre for Lincoln. okay, in the Civil War. And then territory under Hague Convention 4, Article 42, territory is considered occupied when it's actually placed under authority of the hostile army. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that the only way martial law ends is by specific mention in a treaty of peace or by special proclamation by the Commander-in-Chief, who is the President of the United States in our case. Martial law does not cease during a hostile occupation except by special proclamation ordered by the Commander-in-Chief or by special mention in a treaty of peace concluding the war. And that's Article 2 of the Lieber Code. And in Texas, and Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that there has been no treaty of peace and there has been no special proclamation by the Commander-in-Chief. Therefore, the military occupation continues to this day. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that his police are military police with military rank structures and military uniforms. And that's Article 10 of the Lieber Code, which is why they're called law enforcement officers, because they're enforcing martial law. And Dr. Peter Pisters is required to know that his military police get paid in Federal Reserve notes, which are forced loans in military script. Juilliard versus Greenman, U.S. Supreme Court, the forced loans of 1862 and 1863 in the form of legal tender notes were vital forces in the struggle for national supremacy. Legal tender notes. What do you think a Federal Reserve note is? That's a legal tender note. Okay, that's a forced loan. And then under Article 37 of the Lieber Code, I didn't underline this, but I should underline it. This rule does not, Article 37, this rule does not interfere with the right of the victorious invader to tax the people or their property and to levy forced loans. And Dr. Melton Crane, Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're here as a U.S. citizen, as a resident alien, a foreign with his U.S. citizen military troops to enforce martial law. And this is Texas Government Code, talking about a judge must be a citizen of the United States. U.S. citizenship is required to be licensed as a peace officer in Texas. Texas Commission on Law Enforcement Commission rule. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that all Texas codes are edicts under martial law. And this is taken from the non-ratification of the 14th Amendment by Judge A.H. Ellett of the Utah Supreme Court in relation to the case Diet versus Turner. And it should also be noted here that several state legislatures, county boards of commissioners, city councils are constantly legislating to please the edicts of the federal government, the occupying force, and that their legislation in this sense is not an exercise of state sovereignty, but instead a compliance with the edicts of the military force which occupies the several states, and are consequently our edicts of martial law rule. And then Article 13 of the Lieber Code. Military jurisdictions of two kinds. First, that which is conferred and defined by statute. So all statutes are edicts under martial law. Second, that which is derived from the common law of war. Right? You have a right to defend yourself. Military offenses under the statute law must be tried in the manner therein directed, but military offenses which do not come within the statute must be tried and punished under the common law of war. And so there's the courts. So all these judges are military commissioners. That's why they wear that black robe. That's a military uniform, and that's what's going on, folks. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they are engaged in war crimes against Diane and the rest of the employees of the MD Anderson Cancer Center with his forced biological medical experiments by taking reprisals against her for her religious beliefs. And Article 33 of the Geneva Convention. Let's go back and see if that's listed amongst the stuff in the... No, it doesn't say Article 33. That's interesting. Okay. Anyways, no protected person may be punished for an offense which he or she is not personally committed. Collective penalties and likewise all measures of intimidation or terrorism are prohibited. I call that terrorism. Pillage is prohibited. Reprisals against protected persons or their property are prohibited. Protected persons are entitled, this is 27, that one is mentioned, if I remember right. Let's go back. 27, right there, Article 27. So, protected person is entitled in all circumstances to respect to their persons, their honor, their family rights, their religious convictions and practices, and their manners and customs, without prejudice to the provisions related to their state of health, age, and sex. All protected persons shall be treated with the same consideration by the party to the conflict whose power they are, without any adverse distinction based in particular on race, religion, or political opinion. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that the religious beliefs of Diane are none of their business. And any interrogatories, what they did is they sent out, if you wanted to qualify for a religious exemption, then you had to fill out a form. And it had all sorts of questions about your religious beliefs, and that's none of their business. That's an interrogatory, and that's none of their business. So, and Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that religious beliefs of Diane are none of their business. And any interrogatories they presented to Diane is an attempt to coerce information from her, which is another war crime. And that's under Article 31 and 32. Let's see if those ones are listed up here. No, they're not, but that's okay. Still, it's in the Geneva Convention. No physical or moral coercion shall be exercised against protected person, in particular to obtain information from them or from third parties. That's Article 31 of the Geneva Convention. Article 32, the high contracted parties specifically agree that each of them is prohibited from taking any measure of such a character as to cause the physical suffering or extermination of protected persons in their hands. This prohibition applies not only to murder, torture, corporal punishment, mutilation, and medical or scientific experiments not necessitated by the medical treatment of a protected person, but also to any other measures of brutality, whether applied by civilian or military agents. Okay, so medical experiments are brutality, according to the Geneva Convention. Anyways, and it goes on. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're violating Article 1 of the Nuremberg Code. And this is taken from the Trials of War Crimes from Nuremberg Military Tribunals under Control Council Law, number 10, volume 2, page 181 to 182, U.S. Government Printing Office. Anyways, the Nuremberg Code. The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. So this is actually pretty good. So they're violating Article 1 of the Nuremberg Code. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they have issued this mandate to participate in this biological medical experiment, and a mandate is a contract. And this is Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. A written a mandate is a Roman and civil law written command by a principal to an agent, specifically a commission or contract, by which one person, the mandator, requests someone, the mandatory, to perform some service gratuitously, the commission becoming effective when the mandatory agrees. In this type of contract, no liability is created until the service requested has begun. The mandatory is bound to use reasonable care in performance, while the mandator is bound to indemnify against loss incurred in performing the service. And so I should have put that this is a mandate up in the front. I didn't. So anyways, that's Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition, page 3049. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're claiming there's some sort of an emergency. An emergency is justification for nothing, and this is U.S. Supreme Court Home Building and Loan Association versus Blaisdell. Emergency does not create power. Emergency does not increase granted power or remove or diminish the restrictions imposed upon power granted or reserves. The Constitution was adopted in a period of grave emergency, its grants of power to the federal government and its limitations of the power of the states is determined in light of emergency, and they're not altered by any emergency. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that Diane cannot renounce any of the protections guaranteed under the Geneva Conventions. And this is Article 8. Protected persons may in no circumstances renounce in part or in entirety the rights secured to them by the present convention and by the special agreements referred to in the foregoing article, if such there be. That's Article 8. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that the recent Supreme Court ruling authorizing a stay of the preliminary injunctions issued by the district courts against the interim rule issued by the Secretary of Health and Human Services requiring health care workers to be vaccinated. The Supreme Court's ruling was not unanimous, but was divided almost 50-50 and is far from over, with 4 justices dissenting, and the ruling says an order granting preliminary injunction is stayed pending disposition of the government's appeal in the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit and disposition of the government's petition for a writ of certiorari, and if such writ is timely sought. Should the petition for a writ of certiorari be denied, this order shall terminate automatically. In the event the petition for a writ of certiorari is granted, the order shall terminate upon the sending down of the judgment of this court. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that neither the Supreme Court nor the HHS interim rule authorizes termination of employees. The rule requires providers to offer medical and religious exemptions and does not cover staff who telework. And that's in that case. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're under no obligation to obey these unconstitutional and illegal mandates. The acceptance of a license in whatever form will not impose upon the licensee an obligation to respect or comply with any provisions of the statute that are repugnant to the Constitution of the United States. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that by terminating Diane, they are impairing the right of Diane to apply to the representatives of the protecting power for their intervention, and they're restricting opportunities available to Diane to more war crimes. This is Article 8 of the Geneva Convention. No contract, agreement, or regulation shall impair the right of any worker, whether voluntary or not, whether he may be, to apply to the representatives of the protecting power in order to request the said power's intervention. All measures aimed at creating unemployment or at restricting the opportunities offered to workers in an occupied territory in order to induce them to work for the occupying power are prohibited. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that the HHS interim rule says that a facility's failure to comply not will, not would, may, not will and not would, lead to monetary penalties, denial of payment for new admissions, and ultimately termination of the participation in the program. And here's a quote from it. The facility's failure to comply may lead to monetary penalties, denial of payment, and for new admissions, and ultimately termination of participation in the program. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're knowingly, intentionally engaging in war crimes with their forced biological medical experiments upon Diane and the other MD Cancer Center employees by threatening her with termination for failure to participate in their forced biological medical experiments in spite of her religious beliefs, as evidenced by the email from Dr. Peter Pisters, a true copy of which is attached here too. I didn't attach it. All of which is incorporated herein by reference in its entirety, all of which is completely without any authorization and for corporate greed, for something that may not even happen. And so that's it. That's the one at war crimes. And see what there's any comments. Right, no contracts. Okay, so the next one is obstructing by force the free exercise of religious beliefs. Okay, this is similar to the one we did yesterday, but there are differences. Obstructing by force the free exercise of religious beliefs, subjecting to satanic religious ceremony by denying common laws found in the Holy Bible with lies and fraud in a foreign unconstitutional jurisdiction under private international law and their Roman cult handlers. In the name and by the authority of the state of Texas, as a direct descendant of the founders of the Constitution of the United States of America, the supreme law of the land, as one of the posterity found in the preamble by right of blood, I hereby declare. Christina Melton Crane is one of the University of Texas Board of Regents and a bar member and an officer of the court and deemed to know the law. I have reason to believe and do believe that Christina Melton Crane is obstructing by force the free exercise of religious beliefs by subjecting Diane to a satanic religious ceremony by denying common laws found in the Holy Bible with lies and fraud in a foreign unconstitutional jurisdiction under private international law and their Roman cult handlers in violation of 18 U.S.C. 247. Damage to religious property. Whoever intentionally obstructs by force or threat of force any person in the enjoyment of that person's free exercise of religious beliefs or attempts to do so, if death results, or if such acts include kidnapping or an attempt to kidnap, okay, if death results, the acts committed in violation of this section, a fine in accordance with this title, and imprisonment for any term of years, or for life, or both, or may be sentenced to death. Okay, so if death results, they can be sentenced to death. And in any other case, a fine in accordance with this title and imprisonment to not more than 1 year or both. In support of their criminal street gang, and we already talked about that, I really like this, conspires to commit an agreement constituting conspiring to commit may be inferred from the acts of the parties. This can be used literally anywhere. I mean, if you have in Canada, it can be especially powerful because in Canada, Canada has acceded to the Rome Statute, and so you can definitely accuse them of war crimes. You can send it to the Hague and get some heat down on them from Europe. Anyways. A criminal street gang means 3 or more persons having a common identifying sign or symbol and identified leadership who continuously and regularly associate in the commission of criminal activities. Because she is chief counsel of the University of Texas Board of Regents, and she has authorized Dr. Peter Pisters to send an email requiring Diane and other employees of the MD Anderson Cancer Center to participate in his biological medical experiments with an experimental injection that they're calling a vaccine, that they are required to know that any so-called COVID-19 vaccination is an unimproved medical experiment and is responsible for obstructing by force the free exercise of Christian religious beliefs by subjecting Diane to a satanic religious ceremony by denying common laws found in the Holy Bible with lies and fraud in a foreign unconstitutional jurisdiction under private international law and the Roman cult handlers, because civil law, Roman civil law, and municipal law are convertible phrases, and there's a maxim of Roman law, let him who is willing to be deceived, and which is very similar to a maxim of equity, and they lie and cheat and steal, engage in fraud and deception when they criminally convert your name into Diane XXX in this case, which is a Roman cult Cestui trust, under their, and this is found in Tomlin's Law Dictionary, yet still it was found difficult to set bounds to ecclesiastical ingenuity, for when they are driven out of all their former holds, they divide a new method of conveyance, which the lands were granted not to themselves directly, but to nominal fees, to the uses of the religious houses. That's the Roman cult, folks. Thus distinguishing between the possession and the use and receiving the actual profits, while the season of the land remained in a nomina fiat, was held by the courts of equity. All of these courts are courts of equity. Then under the direction of the clergy, they're all under the direction of the clergy. They're bail priests, and that's the Roman cult, folks. To be bound in conscience to account to a Cestui use for the rents and emoluments of the estate. That's taxes. And it is to these inventions that our practitioners are indebted for the introduction of uses and trusts, the foundation of modern conveyancing. And that's taken from Tomlin's Law Dictionary, 1835 edition, volume 2, under the definition of mort main. I see a comment here that says, when you place by right of blood, does this mean that you can trace your lineage or right of blood by reason of mankind? People of color, though born here, were not endowed with posterity standing. Actually, who knows who was sleeping with who in the 1700s? I've seen black people claim it too, and quite frankly, you know, if it was me, I did trace my ancestry. I can prove it, and so, but even if someone couldn't prove it, you know, these people are nothing but a bunch of thieves and pirates. If it was me, I'd make it up. You know, because who's going to call you a liar? Think about it. You make an affidavit, somebody calls you a liar, it's got to be someone that has first-hand knowledge, and they got to be able to prove it. And how are they going to do that? It's impossible. Nobody has first-hand knowledge. All you have to do is make the statement. And anyways, that's what I would do, but I can prove it, and I do prove it. And so let's continue on. Under the Code of Law for the District of Columbia, so it's the Cestui Trust is found in the DC Code, Chapter 854, an act to establish a code of law for the District of Columbia, which was approved on March 3rd, 1901 by the 56th Congress at 31 Stat 1189. And in that act, it says at 31 Stat 1432, the legal estate to be the Cestui use. And they presume you're dead at 31 Stat 1230. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're engaged in war crimes against Diane and the rest of the employees of MD Anderson Cancer Center with his forced biological medical experiments by taking reprisals against her for her religious beliefs. And that's Article 33. We already talked about that. Reprisals against protected persons and their property are prohibited. And Article 27, which is mentioned in the that war crimes statute, protected persons are entitled in all circumstances to respect for their persons, their honor, their family rights, and their religious convictions and practices, and without prejudice to the provisions relating to their state of health, age, and sex, all protected persons shall be treated with the same consideration by the party in the conflict whose power they are, without any adverse distinction based in particular on race, religion, or political opinion. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that the religious beliefs of Diane are none of their business, and any interrogatories they presented to Diane is an attempt to coerce information from her, which is another war crime. And no physical or moral coercion shall be exercised against protected persons, in particular to obtain information from them or from third parties. That's Article 31. I've used these same stuff against the banksters when they're trying to coerce a Social Security number. I used the same stuff against them, and I sent it to the Provost Marshal General in Washington, D.C., and then give it about 6 months, and all of a sudden they don't want a Social Security number anymore. It's amazing how that works. I did that with cashapp, quite frankly. The high contracting parties have specifically agreed that each of them is prohibited from taking any measure of such a character as to cause the physical suffering or extermination of protected persons in their hands. The prohibition applies not only to murder, torture, corporal punishment, mutilation, medical, scientific experiments not necessitated by the medical treatment of a protected person, but also to any other measures of brutality, whether applied by civilian or military agents. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're violating Article 1 of the Nuremberg Code, and The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means the persons involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of consent or coercion. And Christina Melton Crane, Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that Dr. Peter Pisters has issued his mandate to participate in his biological medical experiment, and a mandate is a contract. This is Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're claiming there's some sort of an emergency. An emergency is justification for nothing, and that's U.S. Supreme Court. I got to step away for a minute. I'll be back in a second. Okay, let's see if there's any comments here. Okay, let's continue. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that Diane cannot renounce any of the protections guaranteed under the Geneva Conventions. Article 8, protected persons may in no circumstances renounce in part or in entirety the rights secured to them by the present convention. Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that the recent Supreme Court ruling authorizing a stay of the preliminary injunctions issued by district courts against an interim rule issued by the Secretary of Health and Human Services requiring health care workers to be vaccinated. The Supreme Court's ruling was not unanimous, but was divided almost 50-50 and was far from over, with 4 justices dissenting. And the ruling says, order granting preliminary injunction is stayed pending disposition of the government's appeal in the United States Court of Appeal for the Fifth Circuit and the disposition of the government's petition for a writ of certiorari as such writ is timely sought. So all they did is remand it back to the Court of Appeals because there was a court case going on. Should the petition for a writ of certiorari be denied, this order shall terminate automatically. In the event the petition for the writ of certiorari is granted, the order shall terminate upon sending down the judgment of the court. And Christine Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that neither the Supreme Court nor the HHS interim rule authorizes termination of employees. This rule requires providers to offer medical and religious exemptions and does not cover staff who telework. Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that there is under no obligation to obey these unconstitutional and illegal mandates. The acceptance of a license in whatever form will not impose upon the licensee an obligation to respect or comply with any provisions of the statute that are repugnant to the Constitution of the United States. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that by terminating Diane, they are impairing the right of Diane to apply to representatives of the protecting power for intervention, and they're restricting opportunities available to Diane to more war crimes. And we went through that before. And Christina Melton Crane or Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that this interim rule says that the facility's failure to comply may, not will, not would, lead to monetary penalties, denial of payment for new admissions, and ultimately termination of the program, of the participation in the program. And that's it's a quote from the case. The facility's failure to comply may lead to monetary penalties, denial of payment for new admissions, and ultimately termination of participation in the program. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're busy peddling fear when the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob tells us to fear not. And then there's a whole bunch of citations out of the Bible saying fear not. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they are knowingly, intentionally peddling their fear agenda as justification to engage in forced biological medical experiments, since Diane and other MD Anderson cancer employees, by threatening her with termination for failure to participate in their forced biological medical experiments in spite of her religious beliefs, as evidenced by the email from Dr. Peter Pisters, a true copy of which is attached here to, all of which is incorporated herein by reference in its entirety, all of which is completely without any authorization and for corporate greed for something that may not happen. And then there's a quote from John 8:44, "You of your father the devil, the lusts of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh the lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it." Dr. Peter Pisters and his Department of Health and Human Services handlers and anyone that participates with them are Satanists and will reap the reward of Satanists. But the fearful and unbelieving and abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Revelations 21:8. And so I think I kind of like that one, how it ends. It nails it, in my opinion, about the religious beliefs. Anyways, let's see if there's any comments that are worth talking about. So what you have to do is there's 4 criminal complaints. The next ones I'm going to go through are conspiracy against rights, and this one's probably pretty short. Let's see how long it is. Oh, it's 4 pages, so it's shorter. Conspiracy against rights. In the name and by the authority of the state of Texas, as a direct descendant of the founders of the Constitution of the United States of America, as one of the posterity found in the preamble, by right of blood. So there's a maxim of law that says relate right of blood, and that's why I put that in there. I hereby declare Christina Melton Crane as one of the University of Texas Board of Regents and a bar member and an officer of the court and deemed to know the law. Officers of the court have no immunity when violating a constitutional right, for they are deemed to know the law. I have reason to believe and do believe that Christina Melton Crane and Francie A. Frederick are conspiring with Dr. Peter Pisters and the Secretary of Health and Human Services and others known and unknown to threaten, coerce, intimidate, injure Diane in violation of Title 18 United States Code Section 241, Conspiracy Against Rights. If 2 or more persons conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him by the Constitution or laws of the United States, or because of his having so exercised the same, in support of their criminal street gang, and Christina Melton Crane and Francie A. Frederick and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're violating Article 1 of the Nuremberg Code, and the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that a person involved should have a legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion. And Christina Melton Crane and Francie A. Frederick and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they've issued a mandate under instructions from the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services to participate in his biological medical experiment, and a mandate is a contract. And this is Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. And Christina Melton Crane and Francie A. Frederick and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they and the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services is claiming there's some sort of an emergency, and emergency is justification for nothing. And U.S. Supreme Court, Home Building and Loan Association versus Blaisdell, emergency does not create power, emergency does not increase granted power or remove or diminish the restrictions imposed upon power granted or reserved. The Constitution was adopted in a period of great emergency. Its grants of power to the federal government and its limitations of the power to the states were determined in light of emergency, and they are not altered by emergency. And Christina Melton Crane and Francie A. Frederick and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that Diane cannot renounce any of the protections guaranteed under the Geneva Conventions. And Christina Melton Crane and Francie A. Frederick and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that the recent Supreme Court ruling authorizing a stay of preliminary injunctions issued by the district courts against an interim rule issued by the Secretary of Health and Human Services requiring healthcare workers to be vaccinated. The Supreme Court ruling was not unanimous. It was divided almost 50-50, and it was far from over, with 4 justices dissenting. And the ruling says, we already read that. And Christina Melton Crane and Francie A. Frederick and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that neither the Supreme Court nor HHS interim rule authorizes termination of employees, and this rule requires providers to offer medical and religious exemptions and does not cover staff who telework. And Christina Melton Crane and Francie A. Frederick and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know they're under no obligation to obey these unconstitutional and illegal mandates. The acceptance of a license, whatever form, will not impose upon the licensee an obligation to respect or to comply with any provisions of the statute that are repugnant to the Constitution of the United States. And Christina Melton Crane and Francie A. Frederick, Dr. Peter Pisters, are required to know that by terminating Diane, they are impairing the right of Diane to apply to representatives of the protecting power for their intervention, and they're restricting opportunities available to Diane to more war crimes. And Christina Melton Crane and Francie A. Frederick and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that the HHS internal rule says that the facility's failure to comply may, not will, not would, lead to monetary penalties, denial of payment for new admissions, and ultimately termination of participation in the program. And Christina Melton Crane and Francie A. Frederick and Dr. Peter Pisters are knowingly, intentionally conspiring together to threaten, coerce, intimidate, injure Diane and other MD Anderson Cancer Center employees that are protected by the laws of the United States with his forced biological medical experiments by threatening her and them with termination for failure to participate in their forced biological medical experiments in spite of her religious beliefs, as evidenced by the email from Dr. Peter Pisters, a true copy of which is attached here to, all of which is incorporated herein by reference in its entirety, all of which is completely without any authorization and for corporate greed for something that may not even happen. And so, yeah, and that's the end of that one. See if there's any comments here that are worth answering. Okay, so my book is now available. Why is it not showing up here? Oh, there's a problem with the internet, looks like. I guess they don't like me talking about this stuff. They're not liking me talking about this stuff, it looks like. Some problem with the internet. Have to wait a few minutes for the internet to catch up. Says I have an excellent connection too. But yet the internet's not catching up. They don't like what I'm doing. Have to wait for a few minutes for the internet to catch up. It's slow. Must be YouTube maybe. Although YouTube is not, it's not causing any problems. I refreshed another page here. Something's happening with the internet. I'm getting good signal. Let's give it a few minutes. Okay, well, looks like things are working now. I had to refresh the internet here. My book is now available. Trump, a true American patriot or not? Mike Blackwell asked me to write it, and it actually took me about 2 weeks to write, but then Mike had to babysit me for about 6 months to get it ready to publish. So that's why he's on it, because he babysat me through the whole thing. The stuff on the back was not written by me. It wasn't written by Mike. It was written by the people that he had published the book. So but it really nails it, in my opinion. It says, what truly matters is not which party controls our government, but whether our government's controlled by the people. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens. And this is all taken from Donald Trump in his 2016 inaugural address. And Trump started off saying, for too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government at the cost of its citizens. Washington flourished, but the insiders refused to share in its wealth. Politicians prospered, but allowed our jobs to leave and our factories to close. Not anymore. And so that's all taken from Trump's inaugural speech. And it continues. In Trump, a true American patriot or not, Glenn Fern and Mike Blackwell reveal the depths of corruption, deceit, and manipulation infesting our political system for hundreds of years, regardless of political affiliation. Read the hard evidence that exposes how our elected officials sold Americans into slavery. Understand the Founding Fathers' true intent when they formed our Republican form of government. Discover the influence of the satanic Roman cult on our politicians and political system. Does Donald Trump want to transfer power back to we the people? In Trump, you will see the great battle that is upon us, and I'll tell you, it is big. Matter of fact, in my opinion, most of this book, it was what I did is I took it from a lawsuit. I had a lawsuit, and I went and made a few changes, and it was the book. And so 95% or better of it is provable facts. There's some opinion in it, but very little. And I support it with law dictionary definitions, international treaties, court cases, all sorts of stuff. And so 95% of it is provable facts. And so, you know, make your own decision. That's why I named it Trump, a true American patriot or not. I think, in my opinion, the whole Trump administration was a giant military psyop, and it was all orchestrated. You can order my book off Amazon or my website. It's $40 plus shipping. If you prefer to order the book from my website is SovereigntyInternational.fyi. Amazon does not provide autographed books. If you want the book autographed, order it from my website, but don't forget to let me know what you want the autograph to say. You want to know the origins of the deep state and who's behind it? You want to know why it is called the Trump administration? You want to know what an administration is? Do you want to know how Trump came to be president? Do you want to know who owns Congress? Congress is owned. Yep, they're owned. Why do you think Pelosi gets up there and says, we can't read this bill until after we pass it? She's taking orders from her handlers. Do you want to know why they're called law enforcement officers? Do you want to know how you have become a slave? Probably the biggest reason that you become a slave is because of Federal Reserve notes. That's why they're trying to end the Federal Reserve. And I think that it's just about history. Cliff High says that he doesn't think it'll last beyond the end of the year. So we'll see. But Federal Reserve notes are, think about it, they're bills of credit. When you buy something with a Federal Reserve note, you're buying something on United States credit. That's what you're doing. And if you buy it on United States credit, who owns it? It's owned by United States. And also, number one. Number two, it's impossible to pay anything with a Federal Reserve note. The absolute best you can do with the Federal Reserve note is discharge debt with limited liability. That's another reason that you become a slave. Sounds like your computer's overheating. The fan is going at high speed non-stop. I don't hear any fan here. I don't know where you're getting that from. Maybe that's somebody else on the chat there or something. So Federal Reserve notes, the best you can do with Federal Reserve notes is discharge debt with limited liability. In the scriptures it says, the gold and the silver are mine. Saith the Lord. So then if you think about it, if it's not God's money, then whose money is it? It's Satan's money. So again, that's why you don't want to use Federal Reserve notes. Something going on with the internet for some reason. Says it's got an excellent connection. I guess they don't like us talking about this stuff or something, eh? I don't know. So, do you want to know why they call law enforcement officers? It's because they're enforcing the martial law. You want to know how you have become a slave? I already talked about that. Do you want to know what the root cause of the War of Independence was? It's the same thing that's happening right now. Do you want to know why every president goes to visit the Pope on their first international trip? It's the owner. That's the owner. They have to go and they have to be, an administration is an ecclesiastical office. So they have to get appointed to be administrator. In reality, they're not after me, they're after you. I'm just in the way. Thank you, Donald Trump. And I think that the entire Trump administration was a giant military psyop. When he was on Twitter, he would throw a tweet out there and like he's fishing, and they'd take the bait, and then the next thing you know, he's reeling them in. So anyways, there's a problem with the I think that they don't like us talking about this stuff, and so they're causing problems with the connection. But it's showing that I have a higher bit rate than normal, or than what's needed. It's showing that I have good signal. I mean, and yet it starts timing out. It starts. It's like the bandwidth is short or something. I don't know when he's going to come back. I am. There's a video that I have with Cliff High and what's his name? Patel Patriot, and they're debating about whether he comes back before or after the midterms. I guess we'll see. So that's all you can do. Okay, well, we're going to do the last criminal complaint now. Violating rights and immunities under color of law. During the War of Independence, the motto was "No king but King Jesus." Okay. In the name and by the authority of the state of Texas, as a direct descendant of the founders of the Constitution of the United States of America, and as one of the posterity found in the preamble by right of blood, I hereby declare Christina Melton Crane is on the University of Texas Board of Regents and a bar member and an officer of the court and deemed to know the law. Officers of the court have no immunity when violating a constitutional right, for they're deemed to know the law. I have reason to believe and do believe that Christina Melton Crane engaged in violating the rights and immunities of Diane under the color of law in violation of 18 U.S.C. section 242. Whoever under color of law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom willfully subjects any inhabitant of any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured or protected by the constitutional laws of the United States shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. Because she is chief counsel for the University of Texas Board of Regents, and she authorized Dr. Peter Pisters to send an email requiring Diane to and other employees of MD Anderson Cancer Center to participate in this biological medical experiments with an experimental injection that they're calling a vaccine. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that there is no law that requires anyone to take his experimental biological medical experiment, therefore it is color of law. Color of law is the appearance or semblance without the substance of legal right, misuse of power, possessed by virtue of state law, and made possible but only because wrongdoer is clothed with authority of the state, is action taken under color of law. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're violating Article 1 of the Nuremberg Code. The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters have issued this mandate to participate in this biological medical experiment, and a mandate is a contract. That's Black's Law Dictionary, page 3049. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're claiming there's some sort of an emergency. An emergency is justification for nothing. Emergency does not create power. Emergency does not increase granted power, remove or diminish the restrictions imposed upon power granted or reserved. The Constitution that was adopted in a period of great emergency. Its grants of power to the federal government and its limitations of the power and states is determined in light of emergency, and they're not altered by emergency. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that Diane cannot renounce any of the protections guaranteed under the Geneva Conventions, and that's found in Article 8 of the Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilians in a time of war of 1949. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're under no obligation to obey these unconstitutional and illegal mandates. And Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, Power Manufacturing Company versus Saunders, the acceptance of a license in whatever form will not impose upon the licensee an obligation to respect or to comply with any provisions of the statute that are repugnant to the Constitution of the United States. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that by terminating Diane, they're impairing the right of Diane to apply to representatives of the protecting power for their intervention, and they're restricting opportunities available to Diane, 2 more war crimes. And Christina Melton Crane and Dr. Peter Pisters are required to know that they're knowingly, intentionally violating the rights and immunities of Diane by threatening her with termination for failure to participate in their forced biological medical experiments in spite of her religious objections, as evidenced by the email from Dr. Peter Pisters, a true copy of which is attached here to all of which is incorporated herein by reference in its entirety. That's a short one, 3 pages. Yep, they're messing with our internet. One of the comments says there's also trespass being committed. A corporation's policy does not give it an avenue to administer private property, being the body of a man or woman that is inhabited by the Spirit of God. I agree. That's why I did the Christian subjecting to satanic religious ceremony. The Supreme Court is the only real court, and it's staffed by bar members, which means that it's really not. But it's the only real court. The rest of them are all administrators. So what I'm going to do for the rest of the morning and then this afternoon is we're going to go through more criminal complaints, because there's a bunch of them that I use. Someone asked me how I justify protected person under international law. We'll go through that one too, okay? And we'll go through that one. And read the codes, okay? It's all in their codes. You have to use their codes. And so maybe we'll do that one after lunch. All of the documents that we just talked about are below yesterday's video. In the notes in yesterday's video, links to them are there. When you go there, somebody asked me for access. I don't give anybody access. What you do is you download the document, and then you can have it and do with it what you wish. I don't give anybody access to the documents. I make them so that if you have a link, you can get the document, you can download it, and then you can make it whatever you want to make it. But I don't give access to the documents. So don't ask, because I won't give it to you. But you'll be able to download them and do with them what you want. Okay, so we're going to go through at least one more here before lunch. Criminal street gang. We didn't go through that yesterday, did we? Does anybody remember? I don't think we went through this yesterday. We've already talked about it. This one is a 6-pager, so it won't take us long to go through it, but all these cops are part of a criminal street gang, so you can find comparable statutes in every state codes, okay? Find comparable statutes. So make sure our bandwidth is still working. Yep, it's working good. Okay. In the name and by the authority of the state of Texas, as a direct descendant of the founders of the Constitution of the United States of America, and as one of the posterity found in the preamble by right of blood, I hereby declare. I have reason to believe and do believe that A. Eccles Kirksey, Euless Jailer, is part of a criminal street gang engaged in organized criminal activity in violation of Texas Penal Code, Chapter 71. Combination means 3 or more persons who collaborate in carrying on criminal activities. Participants may not know each other's identity. Membership in the combination may change from time to time. Participants may stand in a wholesale or retail or arm's length relationship in illicit distribution operations. Conspires to commit means an agreement with 1 or more persons that they're or that they or one or more of them engage in conduct that would constitute the offense, and that person and one or more of them perform an act, overt act in pursuance of the agreement. And then agreement constituting conspiring to commit may be inferred from the acts of the parties. And then paragraph D, a criminal street gang means three or more persons involved in a common identifying sign or symbol. Gee, that sounds like a police uniform. Identified leadership, the police and the judges and the prosecutors all continuously or regularly associate in the commission of criminal activities. And 7102, organized criminal activity. A person commits an offense with the intent to establish, maintain, or participate in a combination or the profits of a combination as a member of a criminal street gang. The person commits or conspires to commit one or more of the following: murder, capital murder, arson, aggravated robbery, burglary, they burglarized your vehicle, theft, they stole my vehicle, aggravated kidnapping, they aggravated kidnapping, because that's when they use a gun, right? When the gun is there. And the gun, aggravated assault, forgery, they forged my signature onto a bond, burglary of a motor vehicle, they burglarized my motor vehicle, and any felony offense. Okay, and then it's got a list of these offenses. Okay, conspiring to commit an offense under this section is the same degree as the most serious offense listed in subsection A. Because there are more than three engaging in theft, forgery, extortion, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated assault, burglary of vehicle for profit, and conspiracy with the City of Colleyville, City of North Richland Hills, City of Lake Worth, City of Bedford, City of Grapevine, City of Azle, City of Fort Worth, and others for transportation code offenses when none of them have authority to enforce the transportation code with their fake color of law warrants. Capias, which is a debt, capias is not a warrant of arrest, which is a debt instrument. Capias ad satisfaciendum, a judicial writ of execution, which issues out a record of a judgment where there is a recovery in the courts for debt and damages, etc. And by this writ, the sheriff is commanded to take the body of the defendant in execution and him safely to keep, so that he have his body in court at the return of the writ to satisfy the plaintiff his debts and damages. And that's Tomlin's Law Dictionary, 1835 edition, which means it's a civil dispute. And Eccles Kirksey is required to know that civil disputes cannot lead to probable cause. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, citing the U.S. Supreme Court 5th, 7th, 8th, and 9th Circuits, held that by definition probable cause to arrest can only exist in relation to criminal conduct. Civil disputes cannot give rise to probable cause. That requires them to have jurisdiction, and this is Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, and so in order for them to issue a capias, they got to have jurisdiction, which means there's got to have been a hearing where the bought and paid for clerk masquerading as a judge, is masquerading as a judge, and when acting to enforce a statute and subsequent amendments to the present date, it's always a statute. The judge in municipal court is acting as an administrative officer, not in a judicial capacity. Courts administering and enforcing statutes do not act judicially, but merely ministerially, but merely act as an extension, as an agent for the involved agency, but only in a ministerial and not a discretionary capacity. Judges who become involved in enforcement of mere statutes, civil or criminal in nature, and otherwise act as mere clerks of the involved agency. It is a well-established rule, not only in the state courts, but of the federal courts as well, that when a judge is enforcing administrative law, they're described as mere extensions of the administrative agency for superior reviewing purposes, as a bought and paid for clerk. And the bought and paid for clerk masquerading as a judge are not competent. Masquerading as judge are not competent to do anything judicial, like issue warrants or orders. Ministerial officers are incompetent to receive grants of judicial power from the legislature, and their acts in attempting to exercise such powers are necessarily nullities. And if they attempt to do anything judicial, it's a fraud and a nullity and a void judgment. Where there's no jurisdiction, there's no judge. The proceeding is as nothing. Such has been the law from the days of Marshal Saya. And that's a U.S. federal court case, Manning versus Ketchum, citing Bradley versus Fisher, which is a U.S. Supreme Court case, citing 10 Coke 68, which is Coke in his in the 1500s. A void judgment is one which from its inception is a complete nullity and without legal effect. A void judgment is one which has no legal effect, force or effect whatever. It's absolute nullity. Its invalidity may be asserted by any person whose rights are affected at any time and any place, and it need not be attacked directly, but may be attacked collaterally whenever and wherever it's interposed. A void order may be attacked either directly or collaterally at any time. Not every action by any judge is an exercise of his judicial function. It is not a judicial function for a judge to commit an intentional tort, even though the tort occurs in the courthouse. When a judge acts as a trespasser of the law, and when the judge does not follow the law, the judge loses subject matter jurisdiction, and the judge's orders are void and no legal force in effect. Subject matter jurisdiction. That's very, very important to keep that in mind. It's always about subject matter jurisdiction. It's not about in personam jurisdiction. It's about subject matter jurisdiction. They deny due process all the time. Brutum fulmen, an empty noise, an empty threat, a judge void upon his face, which is in legal effect no judgment of all, and by which no rights are divested, and from which none can be obtained, and neither binds nor bars anyone. You know, I went and a little story here. I filed a lawsuit against FedEx, and I filed it in state court because I didn't want it in federal court, and FedEx removed it into federal court. And I told the judge, I said, and when it went into federal court, I told him, I said, well, I put it in paperwork. I never actually go in there and tell them that to their face. But I put it in my paperwork. I says, I have nothing but contempt for your so-called court. Everything you do is a fraud and a nullity. All your orders are brutum fulmen. and I never had a judge be so nice to me after that. Anyways, so ultimately he dismissed the case, and when he dismissed it, he brought up that I said that all his orders are brutum fulmen. Anyway, so that's why, you know, I've never had a judge be so nice to me after when I just dumped on him. I call him a judicial whore. Nothing but contempt for your so-called court. Anyways, and Eccles Kersey has ceased to represent the government. An officer who acts in violation of the Constitution ceases to represent the government, and the bought and paid for clerk written for Euless forges the demand and signature onto a bond under 17 CFR 240.15C2-12 and are demanding military scrip Federal Reserve notes in the form of revenue for the city of Euless, and their police court know they're demanding military scrip Federal Reserve notes for loans on their warrant letters, making threats of arrest in which they're demanding 282 for failure to maintain financial responsibility and 220 for the registration. And on each threat letter says you may simply pay by credit card, which means it's Federal Reserve notes, military scrip, forced loans. And Eccles Kersey is required to know that the Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land. And you know how I got Eccles Kersey's name? It was in the police report. I can't tell you the importance of getting a police report. Always, always, always get a police report. Get everything they'll give you. And Eccles Kersey is required to know the Constitution of the United States of America is the supreme law of the land. Article 6, Clause 2. This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the constitutional laws of the state to the contrary notwithstanding. And Eccles Kirksey is required to know that Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 of the Constitution of the United States of America says that only gold or silver coin can be used in payment of a debt. And this is no state shall enter any treaty, alliance, confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, and make anything but gold or silver coin attendant in the payment of a debt, pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. But the bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge cannot ask for gold or silver coin because it is not in general circulation and has not been since 1964. And the bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, Britain for Euless, has bonded the case by forging the demandant's signature onto a quasi-contract under Title 17, Code of Federal Regulations, Section 240.15C2-12, and associated regulations for revenue with Federal Reserve notes that are intended for use in the District of Columbia only under the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. And this is Section 15 of the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. It's quite lengthy there. The important thing is, as used in this act, the term United States means government of the United States. The term, and then it goes on and it says currency, which is, and the term currency of the United States, okay, currency of the United States, that means government of the United States, right? Which means currency which is legal tender in the government of the United States, which includes United States notes, Treasury notes, gold certificates, silver certificates, Federal Reserve notes, circulating notes of the Federal Reserve banks, and national banking associations. And so, there we go, right there. The rest of it's just unnecessary, but I put it all in there. Which means the bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, Britain for Euless, is bringing District of Columbia codes not exceeding 10 miles square on the land of Texas in violation of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square, as may by cession of particular states and acceptance of Congress become the seat of government of the United States to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. And the bought and paid for clerks masquerading as judge, Britain for Euless, are ringleaders because they failed to hold an examining trial as required by Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, and instead abused her discretion by applying the law to the facts in the case by issuing a finding of probable cause and order of commitment, demonstrating she's working for the executive branch in violation of Texas Constitution, Article 2, Section 1. Separation of powers of government among three departments. The powers of government of the state of Texas shall be divided into three distinct departments, each of which shall be confided to separate bodies of magistracy, to which those which are legislative to one, those are which are executive to another, those which are judicial to another, and no person or collection of persons being of one of these departments shall exercise any power properly attached to either of the others, except in instances herein expressly permitted. And that's the Texas Constitution, separation of powers. Eccles Kirksey is required to know that no Euless officer is authorized to enforce the Transportation Code. The demandant dialed 911. The demandant and demanded the Tarrant County Sheriff to the scene, and the call went to the Euless switchboard. And Graham's supervisors, Hurtado and Collingwood, came to the scene as his accomplices and as evidenced by the police narrative, and the Tarrant County Sheriff refused to come to the scene. The demandant read to Hurtado, Graham, Collingwood parts of the Texas Penal Code 3903, telling them they're engaged in official oppression. Graham and Hurtado, under instructions from Euless Chief of Police Mike Brown, stopped the demandant for having a Republic of Texas plate on an automobile. Euless police are not authorized to enforce Texas Transportation Code, as evidenced by the email from the Tarrant County Sheriff's Public Information Officer. True copies of the citation, police report, warrant, threat letters, and email are attached hereto, all of which are incorporated herein by reference in their entirety. And they dragged the demandant to their torture chamber jail with Nichols, Kirksey, and Nilsson, where they engaged in torture with their forced fingerprinting, forced feeding poisons, aggravated kidnapping, aggravating assault, their threats, their denials of due process, all of which is for revenue for their criminal corporations: the City of Colleyville, City of North Richland Hills, City of Lake Worth, City of Bedford, City of Euless, City of Azle, City of Fort Worth, Deer Park, Cash Cow, masquerading as state of Texas against the peace and dignity of the state. So that kind of nails them. So they're a criminal street gang. Forgery, kidnapping, it's all in there. And so that's the criminal street gang. So anyways, any questions? I think we're going to knock it off here pretty quick. Any questions? We're going to knock it off for lunch. Any questions? They're a bunch of pirates. They're thieves and pirates. We'll go over one that I have for piracy next, or this afternoon. Piracy, extortion racket. Any questions? It'll give us about an hour and a half for lunch. So whenever we actually stop, about an hour and a half later, we'll start again. So right now it's, we'll say noon, so we'll start again at 1:30 Eastern Time. First of all, they're capuses, okay? If you go down there, most of these cities, at least in Texas, if they have warrants out for you, you can go down there and go to the clerk and talk to them and get papers and all sorts of stuff, and it'll be no problem, and they won't arrest you. I don't know about what state you're in, but I can tell you that here in Texas. So I would just go down there, or have a friend go down there and get a copy of the warrant. And the warrant has to be signed by a judge, okay? And I guarantee you it's not. It's just printed. It's a printout. It's all it is. It's a capias is what it is, okay? It's a debt instrument. So just tell them you want copies of the stuff that's in the file. You give them the case number, and you want copies. Now, some places, like I know in Texas, depending on the case, if it's a county case, then you can just, there's computers. You can go into the courthouse, and there's like 3 or 4 computers, and you just pull up your case in the computer, and you can see all the filings. And then if you want copies of anything, you just print it. And you have to pay for it, but yeah, you just print it. And again, you got to check. You're in Wisconsin, so I have no idea about the local Wisconsin codes and stuff like that. So if you're concerned about it, then have someone go down. But and what you do is everything you get is evidence. Okay, get a police report. Get a police report. Get reports. Order, and you can do most of that stuff online, and they'll mail it to you or email it. And so, what you do is you build a case against them and start filing criminal complaints and sending them out to everybody and their brother. and things will change when you do. Okay, because they're engaged in multiple felonies, and you expose those felonies. So that's what I would say to do, and that's what I do all the time. And I literally, the best defense is a good offense. It's warfare, and you have to go on the attack, and you just get used to doing that stuff. And anytime you have any problem like that, you can do that. If you send me an email, I'll have you put on the list to be notified of when the next meeting is. We have them every Tuesday, and we have them every Tuesday. Usually it's in like Bedford or maybe Colleyville or Salt Lake. You know, that area, basically mid-cities area near the DFW airport. Every Tuesday we have meetings, and then on the second Saturday of every month, the Republic of Texas meets. But you have to get used to it. What'll happen is you have to get used to doing that stuff, and what'll happen is initially it'll be a lot of stuff you'll be doing, and it'll take up a lot of time. But after a while, they'll get the message and they'll leave you alone. And so then it won't be near as much stuff, eh? But initially, you know, until they get the message, then there'll be a lot of stuff. You know, I've filed hundreds. Literally hundreds. I've got 3 flat rate boxes sitting here that I'm going to mail out. 2 of them I'm going to mail out Monday. My email address is engineerwin@yahoo.com. You can contact me there. That's always, that's in my all of my presentations, everything. It's engineerwin@yahoo.com. And so if you remind me that you're on this live stream, and because I have a normal standard response that I give to people, that I tell them that everything's free, and if you want my attention to any matter, then I need a donation. As far as so if you need any help with anything, then I need a donation, quite frankly. I mean, if you want forms and you're going to do it yourself, that's fine. I'll help you out that way. But if you want me to review your forms or to make something up or anything like that, well, then I need a donation. And so it's one step at a time, and you just have to be persistent and pay attention to details, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. You know, that's the reason I'm sharing this stuff, because I've been doing it for a while, and so I don't mind sharing it. I want other people to benefit from it, and so that's why I shared the Word documents. I've tweaked them and adjusted them a lot, and they're pretty good the way they are. A lot of the stuff you have to start thinking outside the box. The Yahoo group got shut down by Yahoo, but we're still on Google. Google shuts us down once in a while. We're also on Freelist, so you can find it on Freelist. There's a Freelist group too, and so you can find us there. Anyways, if that's it, I think we're going to adjourn for lunch, and we'll come back around 1 o'clock. No, 1:30. Around 1:30 Eastern time. So we'll start again at 1:30 Eastern time. Okay. Bye for now.